Protests happening all over the planet. We're going to explore what they have in common on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, thanks for watching the Hot Zone. We're going to finally move on from Syria a little bit. We've got some more to talk about in Syria tomorrow, but for today, I want to get to this spate of protests and riots that are happening all over the globe. I mean, it's hard to find a country where there's not big protests and riots, it seems like sometimes. And as you look across the news today, what I see is a lot of protesting over raising prices and raising taxes and corruption. And so if you just look all around the world right now, we're seeing big protests in Chile, where the government has been forced to move their headquarters, and the people there are protesting because it started because of a raise in the price of public transportation. This was the subsidies that were happening in many cases, especially in Latin America, from Venezuela. We've seen riots over subsidies, the ending of subsidies, fuel subsidies, in Nicaragua. We've seen them in Honduras. We've seen them in Venezuela and Cuba this year. And Haiti especially. Haiti is the big one. These riots have been going on for months now, and Haiti just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And it all started because the government rescinded some subsidies on fuel that made fuel just ridiculously cheap. And now fuel is going to be what it actually costs, and people can't stand that, and they're going out in the streets and just burning everything up. We've seen massive riots in Bolivia over the last couple days. In this case, it's because Evo Morales has really just been slowly turning himself into a Nicolas Maduro-style dictator. Evo Morales is a big socialist. He's instituted all kinds of socialist policies. But at the same time, he's lived pretty high on the hog for a guy from the Pueblo. That was his claim to fame, is that this is the first president in Bolivia's history who came from an indigenous background, came from the poor man, the everyday man, working man, except that he bought himself an $83 million airplane. I mean, nothing says I identify with the working man like buying yourself an $83 million jet. He built a 29-story palace for himself as the White House of Bolivia. I mean, the White House in the United States is a pretty nice house, but in reality, it's not anywhere near as nice as the houses that Donald Trump already owned and that many of our presidents already owned. The living quarters there are nice, and it's very secure and that sort of thing. But in this case, Bolivia is a very poor country, and he spent something like $29 million building this huge, monument to himself. Speaking of monuments to himself, Evo Morales, his nickname is Ego Morales, partially because he built a $7 million museum that is primarily dedicated to his own life story. So, I mean, hey, presidents do that, right? Presidential libraries, except they typically do that out of what's left over from their campaign funds. They don't do that on taxpayer dime. So there you go. The people in Bolivia have been rioting because of that corruption, because of the high prices. And Evo Morales actually ran. He stepped down as president and yesterday ran away, got on an airplane and flew into exile in Mexico. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for sure. We've seen these kinds of riots over rising prices and corruption in places like Lebanon. And Beirut has had something like 20 people killed in riots over the last few days. There have been massive riots in Iraq over the corruption in the government there. We're talking about hundreds of people shot. I mean, in Iraq, when people riot and the riot police come out, they don't use rubber bullets. They use real bullets. They just start shooting. And they've had thousands of people injured by directed bullets at the protesters. And this is not just in Baghdad. It's happened in Basra and elsewhere as well. So everybody there in Iraq is pretty fed up over the fact that Iraq has a whole lot of oil wealth and it's not getting to the people because the government is pretty much just siphoning it off for the big guys. Not only that, but people are not happy about the fact that Iran is pulling the strings on the government in Iraq, that they're a puppet government. These people want to be able to represent themselves without interference from Iran or the United States, for that matter. So massive riots in Baghdad. Now, moving on to Hong Kong, we're going on months now of riots by Hong Kongers, and they're rioting because China started with an extradition treaty where China would be able to extradite Hong Kongers into China to face charges for whatever they wanted. This obviously is going to result in massive crackdowns on political dissidents, people who disagree with the Chinese government. Hong Kong was always supposed to be separate. They're supposed to be self-governing. They're supposed to be separate in just about every way from China while still being a part of China. And so that has gotten worse and worse and worse. My friend Michael Yan has been there for months now, reporting every night on the violence, and it just keeps getting more and more violent. The police are now shooting people left and right. There have been a lot of people injured and killed and set afire on both sides of that. The common denominator again here is corruption. It's rising prices. Many times those prices are rising because the socialist governments can no longer afford to subsidize prices for everybody that got previous administrations elected. I mean, if you imagine if a president was running for office in the United States and they said, if I get to be president, I'm going to make sure that gasoline is $1 a gallon. My gasoline will be $1 a gallon. And, people were like, wow, and they voted him in. Well, then that president was proceeded to take taxpayer funds to subsidize the price of gasoline. And, then when they run out of money and they have to raise the prices back to normal prices, people are going to start rioting. What does all this mean for America? Well, obviously, a more unstable world is not good for America. And part of the reason I would say that the world is becoming more unstable is because of the kind of people aren't sure where the United States stands on a lot of issues now. I'm specifically referring to the Kurds and the issues that they're having because America just pulled out. They told them they would be there for them. They told them they'd have their back, and boom, they're out of there. Now what we're seeing is a whole bunch of kind of backpedaling. So the government, the Trump administration has now decided to keep about 600 troops in Syria. They showed up in Qamishli. They're establishing bases inside the quote-unquote safe zone that Turkey has claimed for itself. Turkey is ignoring them by continuing to bomb and kill people inside that zone. Pretty much anybody that moves is going to have to worry about getting droned over there. Dave Eubank and his crew are still pulling wounded people out every day and facing that kind of danger. Even though there are American aircraft in the air over Syria, supposedly to help the Kurds.
What's important to us is providing them with security from the air. So wherever that is, the beauty of helicopters is that we can fly pretty far. So if the SDF is conducting a mission further north, we can fly north. If it's northwest or even south down the river, we can help them find ISIS targets anywhere in the American and coalition area of operation.
We are bringing them out of the western part of the areas we used to control, and we're moving them back into Iraq, and some of them, and most of them, we're moving back to the States. The forces that remain here will stay in the east, and they will stay in Syria to continue the fight as it continues on through the Syrian Democratic Forces. the mission still continues, and Daesh is trying to resurge wherever they can. Since March 2019, when we defeated the physical caliphate, we've captured over 700 ISIS fighters since that time. We've destroyed many explosives and war remnants, and we continue to do so as we find them cached all over the region. Well, I would say our force mix currently has an array of capabilities. So we have multiple different capabilities to get at ISIS, but our primary way that we do that is through our partner. It's through intelligence, it's through working with the partner, and it's also to hunt and find them wherever they hide and wherever they try and resurge.
Well, they're caveating that, I guess, by saying they're there to help the Kurds fight ISIS. They cannot help the Kurds fight the Turks because the Turks are a NATO ally, and there's some legal ramifications if the United States starts firing on the Turks. So it's a real big clown show. I mean, we're talking absolute goat rodeo in Syria, and it's going to continue to be for some time to come. There's no two ways about that. Also, you've probably seen in the news massive rocket attacks in Israel, and Israel has been striking back throughout the day today, and they have every right to do so. Here's what they had to say about that.
Israel struck a ticking bomb, an arch terrorist working under Iranian instructions and with Iranian funding to plan and carry out terrorist attacks against Israel. Israel doesn't want any escalation, but we will not hesitate to defend our citizens. Israel strongly rejects the recent ruling of the European Court of Justice, which has one aim and one aim only, and that is to signal out Israel and to apply double standards against it.
Okay, folks, that's all I've got for the Hot Zone today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of it. I hope you'll like and share it with your friends. And I also hope that you'll remember to go pick up a copy of my new book, Prowess, The Man You Were Meant to Be. It's a great look at just what it means to be a man in the world today and why so many young people are failing to get there. So for the young man on your Christmas list, or a young woman even, that's a great gift idea. Just go to livefire.us or makingmenbook.com and pick up your copy of Prowess. Thanks a lot. I'm Chuck Holton, and this is The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.